Good evening, everybody. Jeev Galer, it's my pleasure to try and bring things to order here. Hello and welcome in such great numbers. My name is Barry Colfer, and I'm the Director of Research at the Institute of International and European Affairs, which is a think tank in Dublin. Most of our activities take place in Dublin. Most of us are not from Dublin. So it's really just a lovely thing to do things outside of the capital and to be with you in the beautiful city of Galway. So thank you very much for the staff here at the Hardeman Hotel for their great welcome. And welcome to you to Ireland's Voice in Europe in conversation with Midland-North-West MEPs. And as you can see, we're very fortunate to be joined by three of the people whose diaries are most difficult to coordinate in the world. Barry Cowen, MEP from the Renew Group, Ciaran Mullooly, also Renew, and Maria Walsh from the EPP. Thank you very much all for travelling here to be with us. Thank you. But equally, my job today is really easy. I'm just going to enjoy the discussion, but there's three other people I'll mention very quickly. Just a really sincere thanks to Dr. Flynn, President of the Atlantic Technological University, who's joined us. One of the coolest jobs in Ireland, I think, as well. A very exciting moment in Irish higher education, and we're very pleased, Dr. Flynn, that you're able to moderate the discussion, so thanks a million. And indeed, I think some of your numbers are here. Good. But also very pleased that Dr. Brendan Flynn, who I'm told no relation, from the University of Galway, who's been a great champion of this event as we've tried to pull it together. We're very fortunate that someone of such standing and such knowledge is going to play a role at Discussant here. So he'll give a couple of zingers back to the MEPs once they've made their presentation. So thank you. Before I depart and leave you to it, just to remind yourselves, there's going to be a bit of a reception at the end as well, so do please stick around to keep the conversation going. But just my final word, there's a sincere honour that we're joined by Councillor Neil McNeilis, the Deputy Mayor here, the great city of Galway, representing the citizenry here. We're delighted you can join us. You've promised a minute just to give a bit of an official welcome to the crowd for a minute. It's going to take about a minute. And welcome you to the stage.
Thanks a million for that. They're a lovely, warm welcome. First of all, just really want to say congrats, guys. Great to have you in Galway. I'm 52 on Monday, and 52 years ago we joined the European Union. That's how I always remember 1973. And when I talk about the European Union, now more than ever, Europe is so important for all of us. And we're just seeing all of what's happening right across the world. But this constituency of Midlands-North-West, as you know, is just everything from agriculture to industry. It's rural, it's urban, it's got a housing crisis. It's got people leaving the land, emigrating, but at the same time as that, it's got Gael areas, it's got absolutely amazing colleges like the ATU and the University of Galway. And it's just really important that absolutely everybody here, feeds in, gets involved, and share your ideas and feed policy for the region. So to Barry, to Maria, and to Ciaran, thank you so much for making time for tonight. And I'm a big fan of Brendan Flynn from years ago in college. So I see he's brought his groupies again to the events. And to Dr. Flynn from NUI Galway, Atlantic Technical University. Look, the ATU for me it was a symbol really of what this entire region is, from Letterkenny right through Sligo down to Galway as well. So it's really important that we listen to them tonight. Get involved. Europe is an amazing project. It's what keeps us all safe as well. And Ireland has always been stronger as part of it as well. So please support as much as you want tonight. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mayor McNeilis, and my thanks to everybody here. Delighted to be here. Hands up, all the students in the audience. Particular welcome. Fantastic. It's just brilliant to see our young people so engaged with politics and with European affairs in particular at this amazing time and challenging time that we're in. Mention of 52 years ago also makes me think of the establishment of the regional technical colleges in Ireland. Most of them were established in and around 52 years ago, in around the early 1970s, and I suppose what an impact our sector has had across Ireland, and to think that Ireland has the highest percentage of progression to higher education in Europe, I think is something that really is testament to the vision of the people at that time. So it was a time of real change. So absolutely delighted to welcome you all here. This event, as you know, has been organised by the Institute of International Affairs in partnership with the European Parliament Liaison Office in Dublin. And again, brilliant to have people coming out of Dublin. We're worn out from going to Dublin because there's always a feeling that Dublin is at the heart of things. And I think it's just great to see events like this taking place outside. And again, a real welcome to members of the European Parliament for the Midlands-North-West constituency, and congratulations to all of you on getting elected. And it was just a really exciting election at the time. So joining me on stage today, we've Barry Cowen from the Renew Europe group. We've Maria Walsh from the European People's Party. We've Ciaran Mullooly from the Renew Europe group as well. And delighted to be joined by my namesake, Brendan Flynn. Many of you will know Brendan, lecturer and head of politics in the School of Political Science and Sociology at the University of Galway. And it's really good for ATU and University of Galway to be collaborating on events and activities, and we do collaborate on many, many things. Just to say a couple of housekeeping rules. Everything is on the record, unless we say otherwise. We will have about 20 to 25 minutes of chatting on the panel here, and then we'll have it open to the audience for about another 20-25 minutes as well. So it will be over to you. And when we get to that, I'll remind you of a few more things. So make sure you identify yourself and say who you are, if you're affiliated to any organisation, and all on the record here today. The other thing is social media. Love it or hate it, it's out there, and if you are posting on social media, make sure you tag the IIEA and the EPLO. So again, an opportunity to discuss issues of real concern to absolutely everybody here, not just in Galway, but in the entire West-North-West of Ireland, Midlands, and in fact the whole country. So Barry, I'm going to start with you. Former Minister for Agriculture, but now an MEP representing the Midlands-North-West. You have a deep understanding of the challenges facing our rural communities and increasing pressure on farmers to reach environmental targets, shifting land use priorities, I suppose a growing voice for rewilding and push for more sustainable agriculture. How do you see Ireland balancing these demands while ensuring that rural communities and food production and indeed food independence for Ireland, that those priorities also remain strong?
Well, thanks very much for the invitation and for the welcome, and to express my appreciation for people for turning up and participating and engaging with us during a week when we do so throughout the constituency. As you rightly say, my candidacy spoke in the main to two issues: to agriculture, to the rural economy, to its role, to the key driver that it is. Also the issue of regional development, international trade, the role of energy security, being in a position to drive economic development and business and industry and commerce into the regions, and the means by which that might be done. There are three main competencies associated with the European Union in relation to issues that face agriculture today. The Common Agricultural Policy, up for renewal in the coming year, would be determined in the main by the multi-annual financial framework, the amount of money that is made available by net contributors, by the Commission, towards agriculture, towards that common agricultural policy. At present, it's in the region of €390 billion per annum. That accounts for almost a third of the Commission's spend. There are obvious financial pressures that will be placed upon that, which means we have a role to play in assessing, addressing, analysing, scrutinising, and ultimately being in a position to provide an improved common agricultural policy. Despite the fact that, subsequent to Brexit, there's €10 billion of a net contribution that's no longer available. Next year, you'll see the first repayments on the interest alone of 30 billion by the Commission in relation to borrowings that was made to meet the demands of COVID. And you have an increased demand for increased funding towards defence and security, which is understandable by virtue of the geopolitical situation and the war in Ukraine, for example. In the last mandate, or the existing one, the Commission spend in relation to defence and security were about 16 billion. It's envisaged, according to the President van der Leyen in recent weeks and months, that you could be looking at 500 billion over a 10-year period. That's 250 billion in the next multi-financial framework. So that shows you the pressures that will be on those of us who will play a role from the Parliament's perspective in addressing the needs associated with agriculture. And in agriculture, obviously, the strive and the demand and the expectation is to have food production systems that align with environmental ambition and that align with consumer sentiment. And you've seen the protests across Europe in recent years, which would indicate that the Green Deal agreed at the time of which the last cap was put in place has not been sufficient to meet the demands of the consumers, has not been sufficient to meet the demands of the agricultural producers, i.e. the farmers. And they need more help, more assistance, more rewards rather than cost foregone metrics that have been in place to meet the demands placed upon them. And you take the existing cap, there's a lot of conditionality associated with the single farm payment, which originally in its original remit was purely supplement farm income and assist with food production. Now you have that conditionality associated with eco and enviro schemes. If that's to continue, and I've no doubt that it should and it could and it can, but it can only do so if you have the likes of a third environmental pillar that rewards farmers who move in the direction that's been asked of them, who embrace it, who follow innovation, who follow technological advances, who follow genomics, who follow new fertilizing methods, follow new foodstuff methods that has an impact positively on environmental issues, but maintains and enhances the product that we produce that is world-renowned, whether it be in the area of beef production, in sheep meat, in pork meat, in tillage, etc. But you have to weigh that against the idea that we have a 25% net import of proteins from outside the EU, and how we embrace the challenge that exists in the tillage sector to address that. How we embrace the challenge in dealing with third country deals to embrace the potential of those coming in to meet the demand that we have, but also maintaining the standards and the expectations and the commitments we've made as a nation and our sector has made, and not to undermine them.
I should have said that one of the reasons why they asked me to chair this is because I have a big hammer here and I've been known to use it on previous occasions. So forgive me for cutting you off.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on a lot of other issues as well besides agriculture, which I'm sure Brendan will be revisiting afterwards. So thanks for that, and a great setting the scene there. So Maria, you've been a strong advocate for regional development, and as you know, we're in the northern and western region. There was the economic update was issued today. We're a region in transition, still a region in transition. And you've also been a strong advocate for youth participation in politics as well as mental health. And as a country, we face major challenges in housing right across the country, transport and investment, particularly in rural areas and particularly in the northern western region. And how do you see the EU supporting growth, improving infrastructure? I think we're in the bottom 3% of regions, bottom 3 or 4% in regions in Europe in terms of infrastructure, and ensuring that people across the Midlands and North-West have the same opportunities as those in more urbanised regions. And that's a challenge that ATU is trying to tackle as well. So what role, how do you see the EU supporting that, Maria?
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for facilitating this conversation. First and foremost, may I just say, it's really reassuring to be in a room with a number of young faces, and I think it's fair to say, I'm not looking at you, Barry, I'm just saying from a political established family, and if you don't mind me tying this in terms of my own party, Fine Gael, I should focus on that, or in European politics as a whole, it's rare when we see so many young people in the room, which is very reassuring for me, and no doubt my colleagues here too, because we need to meet somewhere in the middle, particularly now, as Barry very much alluded to, this geopolitics at play, and to not ignore your question, but certainly look at it from the why I got involved in politics. I come from about 30 minutes drive from here, big city called Shrule, if anybody's ever been. Thanks for the laugh in the front row. But I was raised there, and it was maybe in 2017-18 when I was like, hang on, who's around here talking about young voices in politics, or talking about myself, who doesn't want to go to Dublin or another large city and wants to live in rural Ireland, but still have the same choice. And a couple of barriers face both urban and rural dwellers, but in this, for my first point to your question, I'll take a blanket approach and say, for me personally, a leading disparity, a leading issue across the EU, which I believe the EU can certainly lead on, and what this country can certainly be a leader within that, is around the supports and the services dedicated to mental health. Second leading cause of death right now in our EU is death by suicide for young people between 10 and 19. And for all of what we're trying to do at various committees, there's 20 in the European Parliament, 27 member states, 720 MEPs, every aspect of the work we do is to support every person to put their feet on the floor and go out and have a choiceful life. And what I mean by that is being able to decide what course to take, what job to develop, what skill set to embrace, on farm or off farm, what food is in front of you. And you cannot do that if you do not have the supports for your mental health. And some of us, over a course of a day, will experience no challenge, but for many of us, we will. And the impact that has on anybody's growth, whether you're in urban areas, rural, extreme urban, it's still the same. So within that, at an EU level, we've created an intergroup that's dedicated to mental health, that's like-minded MEPs, and I have to say I get champion work right across here from MEPs from Ireland on the work that we do. That's around talk therapy skill sets being brought into schools at a younger age, funded by the EU. That's having every piece of policy go through the prism, not just climate or economics, but also through support services like mental health, as well as each member state being held accountable to what the WHO recommends as a 10% dedicated out of a health budget to mental health supports. But we can't just provide mental health supports and the reactive measures. We also have to have folks also getting into the role of being talk therapies, clinical psychologists, courses, more and more courses that we can upskill ourselves in our language. So I say that within that, but don't leave the room without understanding if we continue to dance around the fact that the second leading cause of death for our young people is death by suicide, then we have a very restricted future in the European Union, some 50 odd years on that we've been in it. So we have a role to play in that. The second piece is actually from a regional development standpoint, and I think this is a great week. Both myself, Ciaran, Mullooly, and Barry have brought a number of MEPs under the Regional Development Committee here to the west coast of Ireland this week. We visited the Galway port. No doubt Ciaran will talk about the work he's doing with Western Rail and the corridor and the infrastructure there. We spoke with you virtually at ATU Mount Bellew, the oldest and leading agricultural school in the college or in the country, to talk about the many facets that or lack of choice that we have for people, not just young people, but people throughout the region. And ultimately, for this region, as you pointed out, Orla, region in transition, we have to positively discriminate. Sometimes I have an issue with that term because ultimately we still need to see the check come down to folks like yourself to drive that change. What we heard from this week, and certainly what I'll be working on after this, is the case of how do we look at state aid rules? How do we ensure that funding is going down to the stakeholders that are delivering this change on the ground? So that's like your rural development companies, the folks like yourselves in ATU and University of Galway. That's looking like today I was out in Medtronic and they're trying to create 4,500 more jobs that will allow people the choice to stay in this area. And we just need to be less risk averse and actually put money where the most outer region of our European Union that's most impacted. And if you look at, to Barry's point, defence challenges that this country will face, we can play many games around being military neutral, but we have to come to the fore. There's a whole lot of work being done in technology in various sectors that we can be leaders in here in the west coast of Ireland. We can tap into more renewables, but we also need to be connecting and not throwing money out because we're not connected to more and more grids. So there's various points, but that kind of gives you a flavour, and I'm trying to avoid your eye contact so I continue talking. But there's so many other points that we can do. So ultimately, you all and many of your mates and families have a choice to stay here. And if you decide not to, that's your choice. But we need to create conditions that you return as quickly as possible and build this great region, because otherwise we become what other regions in the EU become, and less populated. And I certainly don't want that to happen to the west coast of Ireland.
Thanks, Maria. And avoiding eye contact is one thing, but avoiding my stick is another. So Ciaran, and again, I did say congratulations to you all in terms of the elections, but you have a background in journalism, Ciaran, and community activism. And, so you have a unique perspective on how European policies impact everyday lives. And Ireland is known to be very pro-EU, and particularly, in rural Ireland, sometimes you might feel a bit disconnected from Europe and European policies. But looking forward, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for communities in areas such as climate action, transport, and economic development? And these are themes that are, very close to all our hearts. And how can Ireland best position itself to benefit from European initiatives?
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation. We'll come back to the question in a moment. Like the other speakers, I'm thrilled to see so many young people in the audience. See a few farmers there as well, mind you, looking after the countryside. The Chair mentioned the regional colleges. I went to a regional college back in the 80s for about 3 months, at Lone Regional College. I failed miserably to get the points for journalism and rap minds in my leaving cert. I wanted to do journalism and failed. Went off to the regional college to do mechanical and plastic engineering, and I quit it because I got a job on a newspaper after about 6 months and went the other way. And returned eventually, after 25 years of journalism with the National Broadcaster and others, returned eventually to do my honours degree and my master's in the Technical University of the Shannon, as they call it now. Brilliant. So it's quite a circle. Maybe there's a message from some people out there: follow your dream. If you want to go around, go the long way. It's just as good as finishing up next year or the year after. But I say it because in my career in journalism, I spent a lot of time, I suppose, chasing people, covering regional and rural issues, and in particular, as the Chair has asked me about the critical issues I'm focused on, coming from that background. And it has to be, the issue of depopulation or concern. What a contrast. We have rural areas facing depopulation, ageing communities, a lack of investment, and then leading to housing vacancy in the countryside and declining services. And then the opposite: come to Galway, come to the city and the urban areas. We're struggling with housing shortages, high rents, and affordability crisis. Incredible contrast. How can the European Union and the European Commission and the European Parliament, how can we cope with both issues? Well, I believe we can. I believe that there are different instruments available in no more than the other 26 member states. They have the same issues as we have. When people say there's a housing crisis, recently I was appointed as Vice Chair of the Housing Committee, and I said, wow, this is going to be a big issue for Ireland. And I said, when it came to getting positions in the committee, there were housing crises all over the community. It's not just our country. There are significant issues all over the community, and there are different situations, but different ideas coming from each of those. That's one of the jobs I'm looking forward to settling down to. But in terms of rural, and it comes back to farming, a bit of Barry mentioned, it is the centrepiece of my job as an MEP. I was asked by Independent Ireland to run. A small MEP called Michael Fitzmaurice cornered me and said, I want you to shout for the rural people and the farmers in Brussels. And it is central to so much. It is really central to so much of our life. I would say even our city life, in terms of the structure of our city and the support network that goes here. And I'm going to come back to that later on. But to me tonight is overshadowed in my mind by what's going on in the world today. Firstly, I say I love my job now. In the old days, I used to chase prime ministers and Taoiseachs, and sometimes they'd stop and sometimes they'd run away. There was one famously who got into the poll booth on the M50 and went down under and disappeared into a cellar, went out the back way to get away from us. I'll tell you who it was later. But yesterday I was coming out with Barry, having met Barry and Maria Kilcormac in County Offaly, and the phone rang from our good friends in Renew Europe to say, would you like to speak to the French president this afternoon? And I said, what? I said, President Macron is obviously engaged, put it mildly, what's going on in the world, wants to speak to members of Renew Europe who are available today and update them on the situation. So I pulled in beside Ganley's hardware shop in Athlone, I opened the laptop, and within about 16 minutes I was called in by the organiser, put your question to President Macron. And I asked about what is going on, the White House, defence, war, but I asked specifically about us. Where do you see us in this picture? Where I'm up the road from people in the Custer Military Barracks in Athlone, they're here in Renmore as well. They want to know, our country wants to know, what part are we going to play in this big picture? And I really am engaged in this for a couple of reasons. Obviously, apart from Ukraine and what's happening with Russia, I'm engaged in the fact that this issue, in my mind, is going to influence everything on this list we're discussing tonight. Everything. Industry, tariffs. Straight away, we're going to have significant problems. You know, anything you look at in terms of our economy at the moment and your future, to me, can be affected by what happens in the next 100 days or so. Now, I hope most of what we discussed yesterday afternoon doesn't develop, because it was a general discussion about the role of countries. A big day coming up for our country. The 5th of March, our Irish government will be asked to step up to the plate in Europe and declare its contribution to the peacekeeping effort going forward. But that, to me, is the crucial thing. It's going to influence everything else. I hope we get back to it again at an opportunity. Now, I hope we have a chance to speak about it in greater depth, because what's happening in the United States is having a critical influence on so many different sectors. I'll try and answer as many questions as I can later on related to that, but as I say, I hope that we'll have an opportunity to discuss some of those issues.
Great. Thanks, Ciaran. And I suppose some of the challenges around inequalities in Ireland aren't really European issues. They're decisions that we have made in Ireland around equal shares of money within Ireland. So that's, you know, not necessarily a European issue. So Brendan, I might give you the baton now for a little while, but you've heard some responses. Some stuck to the questions asked and varied a little bit from that. But we got a really good picture overall, I think, of the key challenges and opportunities. But specifically facing this particular region, from agriculture, climate action, housing, a little bit maybe on housing and transport. But how do you see the broader political and policy dynamics at the European level shaping the region's future? And maybe more importantly, you know, what are the opportunities for us in Ireland to influence European policy?
I'd narrow it down, and I'd start with the people we have here who are MEPs, which is sometimes in the media and in social media and in academia not given the respect and not given the regard and not given the understanding that the MEPs have actually much more salience in the overall system, and I'll explain why. Since 1998, under the co-decision process, they're actually brought into the core of the legislative process. These three people will be sitting in committees where they will have delightful reading of all sorts of subclauses and sub-modules and sub-articles. They're in it. They're absolutely enmeshed in the nitty-gritty of legislative change. So one of the questions that you could be put from the floor is how will these people, and I don't just mean these three, but how will our Irish team and how will this Parliament, how will they get to shape some of the legislation, where, when and how? But there's a second role that MEPs have. And you've seen it here, and you've got actually three great examples, three people who are absolute masters in communication. Okay, Maria did it in her way, Barry did it in his way, and Ciaran did it in his way. Communication has never been more important, and I actually think it connects very much to the last point, which is that in the Trump era, when we have, how can I say this as diplomatically and as politely, we have a challenging administration in Washington.
I probably would have said it a little bit more colorsome, but you're more diplomatic than I.
We're
on
the record.
If we have a challenging administration, and here's the problem, the government in Dublin and the government in Paris will want to be in Trump whispering mode. They will not want to call out that administration for some of the outrageous and egregious things they're doing. So who will be the voices who will do that? Who will be in the position to call it? I'm not pointing at these three specifically, but MEPs are in that position, and they will do it, and they have done it. So I think that's quite a different role. So let me just move into three specific things. On the farming piece, and it's kind of directed at Barry, but anyone can jump in. What stands out for me as two huge challenges on the farming and the food piece is, and I'm just going into detail here, because I've been following the legislative process, and I was reading a little piece about a new law which is trying to bring what the European Commission call agriculture into the value chain. And I read it, what's that mean? And I read it again, I still don't understand this. And I'm an academic, and we do this stuff. So, and I read it again, and I said, they're trying to make sure that farmers get fair prices for their commodities. And I just translated that into normal speak. Who will take on the power of the supermarkets and retailers in Ireland and across Europe? This is a fundamental structural change. We all know about the tech bros, and we know about how social media, and we know how about various industries have gone, but we've ignored the elephant in the room, that the actual selling and retailing and distribution of food has become so concentrated in such a small group of people that what hope is there for family farmers? A cousin of mine who's a dairy farmer, what hope has he got to pass on that farm to his son or his daughter? What hope have they got for a future of farming that has a return on it? So I think I would love to hear ideas there, because I don't see it in the European Commission proposal. I see stuff that even academics would sort of blink at and say that's mysterious and incomprehensible, and we specialise in that. So I think we need somebody to communicate and get the legislative change. Maria talked about mental health, and she talked about this in the election, and it's no surprise she got re-elected because it resonated. And it's powerful when she speaks about it. And I think what I see in this is this European Parliament needs to be unafraid to move out into new areas. But my question might be, not so much for Maria, but for everyone, how far can you go with that when you're up against a national administration in Ireland that has decided to purposely abdicate its funding and its responsibilities on mental health? So where does the MEP who's courageous and creative, as you are and others are, you're not just you, but you deserve praise for it, who've taken up the mental health issue, when you come up against the Dublin bureaucracy and the HSE bureaucracy, and I'm not trying to demonise them, what scope is there for an MEP to get purchase there, to get change? How do we do that? Do we go through a rights-based approach, or do we get financial instruments? And then how do those financial instruments operate? Ciaran's last point about peacekeeping and the overall final kind of the mood and the overall geopolitical environment. You said March the 5th we're going to have to make some kind of decision. And all I would appeal for there is, will our MEPs be able to add to the national conversation on security and defence? Because I find that conversation sometimes to be a Punch and Judy show, that if somebody suggests something that sounds like we should be more ambitious on defence, that you're automatically selling out neutrality, and I'm not pointing at you, or it's been thrown at me. Or if you dare to say, actually, there's some problem here. I'm a bit cautious about, for instance, our triple lock being removed. That person is demonised. Maybe there are good arguments about keeping a triple lock, but let's hear them. But what I find frustrating is, what do you think you can bring as MEPs to that national? It isn't actually a conversation. It's a national silence on security and defence. It's a taboo. We'd sooner talk about lots of other things, but we won't talk about security and defence. And if we do, we have this cartoonish, shouty conversation where somebody, you're selling out neutrality, you're working for the Russians, and it's cartoonish. Whereas I think we need an adult conversation, which is a bit more sophisticated.
And we have had adult conversations in Ireland about many sensitive issues in the last number.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of the time and the need to include some voices from the audience. So what I might do is I might ask each of you to maybe respond to one of the points that Brendan has made, or is there anything else you want to add on?
No, I think
Brendan?
they can ad-lib.
The agricultural one in relation to food value chain, I think in the first instance, as a nation, our government has afforded a responsibility to the food regulator to observe and make recommendations as they see fit to government for improvements in relation to ensuring that nobody is taken advantage of within the whole produce to processor to delivery. In relation to, again, the defence and security, a vital component and element of defence and security is food security.
Yeah.
So you can't fund defence and security without funding tools and aids to ensure that food security is guaranteed during that process too. So that's a means and a method by which we will argue within the Agricultural Committee as Irish representatives to ensure that any increase in defence and security spending, which may be agreed, also has within it a component that matches that into the agricultural spend as well to meet that demand. I think that's a simplified answer to a very technical question, I know, but in relation, I think it was the government made a commitment to put a food regulator in place. They've honoured that. It's now incumbent on them and the Dáil to ensure that they're adequately resourced with the mechanisms to make an impact. I could say the energy regulator had responsibilities too. I'm not sure that they've lived up to the expectation or the commitment that they had given. When you look at the auction system and the slowness and the protracted manner in which competition enters into energy provision, which is curtailing our ability to offer and make an offering to this region and others where we want to attract investment, but that there is a possibility and a contention amongst many of us that the West Coast potential in relation to wind energy has to be explored, has to be expanded, has to be funded from a pan-European perspective, because it not only benefit our region, our country, but has the potential to solve an issue together with the solar countries of the Mediterranean to offset the cruel exposure we've seen and had by virtue of the dependency on Russian gas and its impact on cost of doing business and the cost of living. It's got into every home and every business in Ireland as a result. Our costs in Europe are 5 times more expensive than Europe, and we in turn are quite behind many parts of Europe.
I'll hand over to Maria there now.
Yeah, just to quickly run through all points. From a mental health perspective, I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree. I think decisions get made and farmed out, and then we look at the rise of gender-based violence. Then we look at the rise of absenteeism in work, because often in our role, the European Parliament or EU bubble as a whole loves to equate economics with something. And I can appreciate that in some ways because you have to get all countries on board. But myself and like-minded colleagues have been saying absenteeism means $1 billion and a half lost to economics. So if this is the way we need to have these conversations, we do. Lobby hard, speak often, speak in rooms that are very, very uncomfortable to talk about mental health. But there's some structural changes at a national front we can change. Like, I fundamentally do not believe anybody who's in crisis mode should be presenting with a family member at A&E. I do not believe it. It's not fair on the person, it's not fair on the family, because sadly we diagnose by physical care and then a family member is on watch then without the skill set and support they need, because we do not have the value add. That's a national, local issue that we can resolve, I believe, quickly. And then a European front, it's about targeted funds targeted funds, best practice. I mean, the European Union is awash with best practice. Other countries do it so much better, Nordics in particular, at training young people at a primary level, a Montessori level, about the mental health. The feelings are on me. We have it in Irish, Tabrónarm. There's no reason why we can't begin in that in terms of proactive care. Just to touch base on, ignoring Orla for a second, just to touch base on defence and Trump and everything Barry has shared. It is a very scary time, and it is going to be not just 100 days, but we are looking at a couple of years. And if the Democratic Party do not get their SHIT together, it could be 8 years, it could be 12 years. And the problem is, it is incredibly impactful. And I'm talking about as an LGBTI person, an ally, and the quick rollbacks on rights as a woman, as a gay woman, in the political space. And that, in a very anecdotal way, I said it before, it's like the wind. All that stuff comes to Europe and it's coming fast. And we see it in the Eastern Bloc countries, particularly in Hungary, and the infiltration we see online from outside resources. And the problem is we don't have conversations like this anymore. Critical thought. You hold me accountable, I hold you accountable, and we're growing. And we forget to look in the room to see who's not in it. So academics, youth, our aging population, farmers, different organisations that are around the table, like-minded to move forward, and we begin to only live in silos. Hence the reason why we have a growing MAGA tribute that is growing right across the world. I could go on, but hopefully get some ideas and solutions from you all, because we shouldn't be a talking shop. We want to hear your ideas and solutions too.
Thanks, Maria. And over to you. And you set the tone for some of this, Ciaran.
And I suppose Brendan kind of hits it on the nail. I mean, what's the point? Or is it a shouting match? Or is it a kind of a game? Punch and Judy or something like you were saying.
Yeah.
You know? What is the point? And I suppose if we took that attitude at the beginning, we wouldn't go to Brussels or Strasbourg at all, because there's 700 of them and there's 15 of us from Ireland. 700 plus of others. But I have found in my experience, we have so many allies there. You just, when you go into the canteen, you go, the first week I was there, I was brought into a German MEP's office for a discussion about entering his party, the European Democratic Party. And when I arrived in the office, firstly I was stunned by the amount of German emblems in the office. Everybody else's office seemed to have maybe a couple of posts or maybe a picture of a family or something. They had an incredible array of German emblems. It was kind of stunned me a little bit. I wasn't sure I was in the Bundestag or was I in the guy's office. But then there was a general discussion that started about neutrality. And, I said, well, we are neutral. Historically, that's our position. Yeah, you are neutral, and we know that, and we will go ahead and form the army anyway. That's exactly what the guy said to me on the first day. We will form the army anyway. And I obviously responded immediately and said, we'll have no part of it. We see our way, our role in Europe as a neutral country to play a part as a peacekeeper and to work with politicians of all colours in the Parliament to try and win the arguments whether it's farming, whether it's education, whether it's mental health. We go in there and we find allies, and that's what we do. Farming has 3 big issues coming down the line, huge issues in front of the Parliament. Mercosur, the deal that's there, a little issue over nitrates, which is huge in a lot of the country, and a small issue of live animal exports being either affected or banned. And Barry will tell you, we go into that committee and it's tough in there. But you know what? We find an ally in the room. Our friend from Danish, Asger, from Denmark, stands up and backs us. And then we go to the next meeting, we find another country who backs us. And that to us is the power of one. People talk about it. That's to me what we can do. We have a voice. You're quite right. Under the Lisbon Treaty, we're a co-legislator. We have our voice. It has to come back to us. Whatever the Mercosur deal can't go through, it has to come back to us. And we have a say. And that to me encourages me that we have to fight harder. We have to work harder to win that conversation, to win the battle, and engage more and more people, which are friends and your enemies in the Parliament.
Brendan, I'm going to come back to you before we go to the audience, and I'm not sure whether we've really looked at this region.
Okay.
I know we've talked about really global things, global supply chains, tariffs will all impact agriculture and everything.
It's my fault, sorry.
No, yeah, you took us way off, and it's my fault actually. But Brendan, back to you. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of signal before we head over to the audience?
Yeah, well, the thing, it's in the name of your institution, the Atlantic Arc, the Atlantic Heritage. Bob Quinn had that wonderful series years ago, Atlantean. I've always been attracted to this idea of we're part of an Atlantic of culture and business and opportunity, which is over in Boston. I have relatives in Boston. And it goes up to Iceland, and it's down in the Azores, and it's over in Lisbon. Would that we were all in Lisbon, right? And I see that being torpedoed by Trump. And the toxicity coming out of that administration from the top down. We need to be careful, however, there's lots of really great Americans who didn't vote for Trump, and even some fine Americans who did. And we need to be very careful in these years, and Maria's absolutely laid it out. It isn't just 4 years, it could be a lot longer. So we need a strategy which is about Atlantic culture, business, opportunity, communications. And I mean hard communications, the subsea cables. Barry mentioned them, right?
Chinese cutting cables up off the North Sea, allegedly, recently.
I was going to say allegedly. We have to put that one in.
I did say allegedly.
But also the softer side. The human connection with our American cousins and our Canadian cousins and our Greenlandic cousins and all of that wonderful ecosystem of the Atlantic. So I think the parliamentary people have that vision. They get it, because as Ciaran describes, you're mixing it with Portuguese MEPs, you're sitting beside French Atlantic MEPs, you're talking to people from Denmark who of course have connections to Greenland and so on. So we need to invest in that Atlantic opportunity.
In relationships those relationships.
Higher education, everything.
Yeah. Okay, so look, we've spoken for way beyond our time, so we're happy now to take some questions from the audience. Going to try and keep it as short as, keep your questions fairly brief. If somebody else asks a question that you've asked, please put down your hand. So I saw the gentleman there on the right, then the gentleman on the left, and then the gentleman at the back, in that order, and then I'm going to take a couple of women.
Sean McNamara, President of ICSA. We're all talking about, but there's a big one we didn't talk about, and that is generation renewal. We see that in our type of farming, when I'm at, we say, well, we fight for sucklers, sheep, beef men, tillage men. 4% are under the age of 35 at this stage. 70% is over the age of 65. And then we have 26% between the age of 35 and 65. Now, we are looking at the moment, and want is to fight for it in the EU. We're looking for a serious package for farmers for a farm retirement scheme. Succession. We're looking for 30,000 a year to be paid for a farmer for 10 years. And also 30,000 installation aid to be paid to young farmers. There's a serious problem with young farmers out there. As you know, on suckling and beef, it's very hard to get money, credit. We want to see something being done about young farmers getting credit from the European Bank or whatever way it can be done. It's a serious problem at the moment. Like, if we let this go, keep going the way it's going, like, we're talking them serious numbers already.
I'm going to interrupt you there now, and I'm anxious to hear a lot of voices. So if you have a question, can you ask it?
Yeah,
and,
I'll ask this question. The big thing I want to see is regeneration renewal, and I'd like to use the fight for it in Europe. We need to see young people coming in the farm, or else food security will be a serious issue unless we have to get young people in our farm. That's my question. Thanks.
Brilliant, and it's a great question. So,
the Vision for Agriculture was produced last week by the Commission with responsibility for Commissioner Hansen, and he talked about many issues in relation to competitiveness, talked about simplification, enhanced payments for innovative practices and so forth, and the commitment in relation to generational renewal. And our own government has made that commitment too, and is in the process of engaging with the electorate in relation to proposals that they may have for adjudication, because it's a national competence. But that's not to say that there would be provision within the CAP to have matching funding maybe to meet the demands that's out there. You're right, it was very prevalent during the course of the campaign. The farming community and the rural community was anxious that some certainty be brought to the pathway of which agriculture might be on, that it be funded accordingly, and that the youth could see that there was progress being made and there was the potential for them to derive a livelihood and educate their own children into the future. So, I think all parties and none are conscious of a commitment that has been made and that they want to make, and participation in arriving at a conclusion that might be met with approval.
Add to that, because like Barry and Ciaran, I also sit on the Ag Committee, and in the hearing with Commissioner Hansen, and since then the work has been very focused on generation renewal. He visited Ireland, one of his first member states, a couple of weeks ago. You were there, and the key focus and the key task there was generation renewal. While Barry rightly pointed out the retirement scheme, based off your numbers, I'd be interested in seeing how at an EU-funded level, it'd have to come from national and meet. But there's other things like access to land in terms of financing, as you mentioned. Young female farmers are not getting their fair share. We're ignored in many parts, and organisations like your own also has to take that serious approach. And to ensure that the supply chain, as Barry rightly pointed out, is also fair. I will also add, we consistently change the goalposts for young farmers, or every farmer, but young farmers. So if I'm about to take over my dad's farm, which I'm in the process of trying to work on, he's a hard bargain to fit, but the goalposts consistently change. So we're not allowing that reliability and that's where us in the simplification also comes in. So there's many key areas versus handing them a check to a farmer to retire. We also have to contain that knowledge, and that's incredibly important too to the system.
Okay, so our next question there, from this gentleman there. Sorry, next question, please.
International development student for the University of Galway. My question is, as MEPs, between your ability to be bipartisan and to coalesce with people you wouldn't necessarily agree with politically or personally, and your ability to hold steadfast to your own maybe party beliefs or individual beliefs, which do you believe will be more useful, because they could both be seen as equally valuable? Which do you believe would be more useful going forward? As Maria says, we're entering a scary time, and as you will come up against people who may not play by the rules that you hold yourselves to.
That's a lovely question. Great question. I'll give you first kick at that one.
It's a great one for me, and I won't say it's an easy one for me, but it's a great one for me because I come from an independent background. And I would never have joined one of the mainstream parties in this country in the first place because I had independent views. Really strong independent views, and I still have. I joined Independent Ireland at the time because when I stood in front of their leader, I went to meet their TDs and I said, listen guys, I don't agree with some of the stuff you're talking about. And they say, well, listen, you will not be whipped when it comes to a vote on this party. In other words, we're not going to make you vote in any way. That's what I was told. And better still, when I went to Europe, I found the same. Renew Europe, I must obviously, I'm centrist, that's why I'm there, okay? But within that barrier, I still have the opportunity. So the answer to your question is, my own independent personal views are, to me, are most valuable. They're the ones I value most. And the beauty of the Parliament system is that, within Brussels, the Renew Party group are split down the middle on an awful lot of things. When it comes to Mercosur, we're going to be split. The president of Renew, who's a French MEP, has told me she's with me, but we're barely going to make a majority with her in it. So to me, it's important you hold on to your values, your own independent values. I vote the way I vote based on my experience in rural Ireland, the key issues that keep people on the land. They have a great thing in Europe called the right to stay. It's just the same, but we need to follow it up with policy, and that's one of my key personal beliefs, and that's what I value most.
Brilliant. I'm going to Barry in on this, and then you, Maria.
I just think from a national government's perspective, I personally believe that the whip system serves us well insofar as you can commit to stable government with a programme for government and a set of priorities and an implementation plan that in the main you can be sure can be adhered to. As I said, it's good for international investment to have stable, steady government with a time frame of 5 years in place. In relation to Europe, it's different. An amalgam of parties come together insofar as we can to try and have influence by virtue of numbers. But I think the greatest success associated with Europe and the European movement and entity and project in recent times has been the unity of purpose in relation to Brexit and the support it had for our country and the Good Friday Agreement, for example, and in relation to the response to COVID and the vaccination programme. Our strength is our unity, and I think in response to the challenges faced with the international trade and the potential trade war, our greatest strength is the unity of Europe, and we can't allow a situation evolve when Kissinger wanted to know many years ago, who do you ring when you need to talk to Europe? So it's vitally important, personally and selfishly, our trade with America is very different to others. We're the 7th largest nation, believe it or not. We have 120,000 jobs that are in the US associated with Irish companies that are located there.
And that's not a well-known fact, actually.
No.
Yeah.
And as a block then, 156 million surplus for Europe in relation to goods and products, with 106 million surplus in favour of the US in relation to services. So it's mutually detrimental for tariffs to interfere with that, and we'd hope that message will be given loud and clear by all those who visit the Trump administration on behalf of member states in Europe.
Yes, so personal or party, really.
Yeah. A couple of things. So the EPP group is a broad church, and funny, in 2019, one thing as an LGBTI advocate and ally, and someone who believes in women's autonomy, the question on the campaign trail is like, what are you doing? But I have to say, I'm really proud of the work that I do in such a broad church group, because I actually have, I believe, a bit biased of me to say, a better scope to bring people with me through narrative, through looking people in the eye, soft lobbying, and then showing them lived experience, like myself. And I always remember a teenager told me when I got into politics, we were having a similar conversation, what about politics? And he was asking me about Fine Gael and my beliefs. And he had said, I always think about it like the bus journey. You get on the bus, and the bus is not perhaps going to the final destination that you want it to go to, but if you're not on the bus is never going in the direction that you need it to go. And I always think about that within Fine Gael, within the EPP. There's many times I don't agree with my colleagues, but by sure I'm at the table and I'm fighting, versus outside the door. So that Teddy Roosevelt comment, I prefer to be in the Coliseum, get my ass kicked, than up in the nosebleeds talking about it. And that for me is a very clear sentiment. Yes, I lead with value. We do not get whipped. I make sure we get strongly lobbied in order to go in a certain direction. But at the end of the day, I hit the green, I hit the red, and I hit the white. That's the buttons I hit. And sometimes, though, back to your point about communication, I have to do better at communicating my values and the reason why I vote, to the wider audience, because the black and white in the text is often not captured in the 280 character of a tweet that you might be seeing. And that's where the disparity I often meet in politicians and communities, and how we're representing you, the 1.1 million across Midlands-North-West. Yeah, I hope I captured
Okay, Maria. There was a gentleman at the back, and then there was a lady over there in red.
Let's get the latest.
Thank you. Councillor John McDonough, Galway City Council. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for being here this evening. My question actually touches on transport infrastructure on the western seaboard and in Galway, so it's a kind of a two-pronged question with relation to how do you see the Western Rail corridor progressing up as far as Sligo, and how long do you think it'll take? Secondly, the Tuam, the Athenry to Tuam connection, do you see that happening soon? Because if you look at the last 10 years, 2010, 70,000 people used the Limerick to Galway line. 700,000 are predicted will use it this year. So I mean, it's a vital component. And then I come back in, and we all been in the city, so we see the traffic gridlock. What's your view on the traffic management for the city with regard to a GLUAS in combination with a bus infrastructure? Because most of the people, if you get the rail infrastructure coming from the north down into Galway, that's where the majority of the people travel. So do you see a role for both the GLUAS and buses in the city to make it more vibrant? And of course, fines will now, and that will be now up and running pretty shortly, and that will take up to 200 trucks a day off the road, buses and lorries. So thank you for your time.
That's great. So public transport, and I think Ireland is the only country without a transport research centre in Europe. So that's something that's hopefully on the cards. So I'll start with you, Maria, this time.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I might lose some folks in the room, but hopefully not many. I'm a fan of, first and foremost, actually delivering on this ring road that's been talked about for 20 odd years, and hopefully many in the room believe in that project. Bureaucracy and sadly one or two people have infiltrated that, but we just need to get it delivered because I know the knock-on effect. To your point around the GLUAS, I would be in favour of. I would be in favour of obviously every development that we have going forward is done so in the sense of we have pedestrian, we have bike, and we have bus. And the less and less cars we have on the road, the safer and the cleaner it will be. I live out in Shrule. I'm not expecting a bus to pick me up outside the door, but we do need more touch points, or to your point, the Western Rail, where I can clearly and cleanly get to A in order to continue on. I learned a lot this week. I thought I knew a lot about the Western Rail corridor, and certainly learned a lot more from the Western Track team there. And it's now about just finding, as I mentioned at the start, not being risk averse and actually delivering the funding specifically to projects like that need to happen 10 years ago, and we need to see it not in 50 years' time, so that the likes of ATU, University of Galway, TUS, further afield can do what they do best, and we can move people cleaner in and out of the city versus having this chokehold. I hope I answered. I was trying to touch point. Everything you said, I'm in favour of. Yeah.
Yep, Ciaran.
Yeah, so the issues are linked in terms of the rail line going up all the way, and then the city. We went, as Maria said, we were on the track in Athenry the other day. To answer the question straightforwardly, I was delighted to listen to the committee of the Western Rail Track. Said they're pretty confident Athenry to Claremorris will start this year.
In our lifetime, is it?
No, they actually have, and now I don't know how they've got these. I think I have a fair idea actually what they feel that they will get to a point of going to procurement on that stretch of the line this year. They were making the argument to us on the next stretch.
Great.
They were talking Claremorris into Collooney. That's the one they were talking about. And in fairness, to go back to independence, Marion Harkin, the junior minister, was there and seemed to be supporting insofar as the decision has to be made. They're in the 10T area, which is in short for everybody else. They're in the right zone in terms of European development. It is an important infrastructural link. We all know that. It is crazy that if you had to go from Galway to Sligo by rail, you have to spend 6 hours and 40 minutes going to Dublin and back down to Sligo. It's absolutely crazy. Europe has recognised it, our state has recognised it. We'll see now if the government delivers on it. I think when they are doing that work, as I'm told they're starting this year, they should continue the feasibility work to Sligo. Get that out of the way. The second issue with regard to the rail network, or the new light rail network for the Galway. I don't want to offend you, but let's sort out the road first. let's get the roads sorted out first.
Okay, Ciaran,
I think
thank you.
And I think the planning issue has to be looked at with regard to the roads.
Thanks. There's a lady there in the red had a question. And then a lady in the front row.
Hi, my name's Ellen. I'm a BA Government student in University of Galway. My question is, there's been a portion of the conversation centred around security and defence, and as an aspect of that, how is the European Parliament tackling cybersecurity? I know it's an extremely broad topic. It goes from the HSE hack in 2021 to the growing crimes of stalking and catfishing, which does affect people's mental health and work and social lives, and also more specifically the effect of disinformation in our political society. You can see it internationally with Trump in America and the Russian-Ukrainian war, but even in our own rural communities, the effects of the protesting against asylum seekers being placed in rural communities, how that information for those rural communities is communicated to them. Do you feel that the European Parliament is putting enough emphasis on developing legislation and a way of regulating disinformation from an international viewpoint?
Great question. Barry, you kick off this one.
There's a lot in that,
Lady in the front row.
but thanks for the question. And my first reaction to the question is the cyber attack on the HSE costs more than COVID. That's how vitally important it is for us to be in a position to avail of the expertise that exists throughout Europe in defence mechanisms to protect our cables and our cyber infrastructure. Warfare, defence systems, it's not all about military artillery anymore. It's about being attacked in those ways. And we have to share information, we have to share expertise, share defence mechanisms, and that comes at a price. We can't piggyback that any longer. And we have to be in a position to make a contribution to ensure that we pay for and avail of the protections that are there. The other point you made was in relation to
Disinformation.
the Digital Services Act in Europe. Again, the difficulty here, I find, almost is keeping pace with the advancement that's been made from a technological or AI aspect. And you'd almost need a standing committee engaged with relevant expertise, making recommendations to Parliament to keep up to date with it. But you're right, and Michael McGrath, as our Commissioner, has been charged with a very serious role in relation to the Commissionership for Justice, which is talking about rules-based systems, which is talking about protecting democracy, which has an input into the likes of the Digital Services Act to ensure that democracy and the rules of engagement in relation to democracy are respected and appreciated and enforced. Enforcement. And you're back to the huge resource and technological advancements are to every aspect of life, but also, as Maria spoke about earlier, the negative impacts that exist all too glaringly in front of us in our own towns and villages, let alone in Europe. And we have to come together to ensure that we protect society, we protect the youth especially from the dangers associated with that activity.
Just a couple of points on that. In terms of cybersecurity, and to add to Barry's points, right now, if you look at cybersecurity and the impact it's having, say, on a gendered prism, so women, right? So I sit on the Justice and Home Affairs Committee as well as the Women's Equality Committee, and we're doing a body of work on deepfakes. So 99% of deepfakes, so AI-generated content, video, picture, audio file, 99% that is created is pornographic and sexually explicit. 96% of the victim that targets is women and young girls. And right now, to Barry's point, we have the Digital Services Act, we have the AI Act. We here, closer to home, have Coco's Law, designed for in honour of Nicole Coco Fox. But the issue is the person creating that content is not targeted and is outside of the laws of jurisdiction at an EU level. So we're working to tighten that through current EU legislation, and then paving the way at an Irish front, because we gotta be adults in the room. We house so many of these platforms. We have to take responsibility to make sure they're adhering to not just EU law but national law and protecting citizens, particularly young girls. That's one thing I wanted to ask, or wanted to flag, in one aspect of an ever-growing cybersecurity space. And for many years, I could go down human trafficking. 2,000 or 3,000 women and young girls are estimated to be trafficked in and out of Ireland on a yearly basis. We cannot track them, often because we rely on outside sources. So the United Kingdom is a third country, but we rely on their expertise because we haven't built the skill set, and that's on us. And we have to close that loop. Otherwise, you look at cybersecurity and you think, well, how is human trafficking, how is gender-based violence, how is the rise of pornographic imagery really impacting society? Well, you come back to your final point around free speech and critical thought. We're doing a lot of work at an EU level too around free and independent media. Terrifying what's happening in the press office right now in the White House, where they can pick and choose what media journalists cover. But that comes also here. You see Romania, you see Hungary, you see aspects of here. We're not holding people accountable, and that's why we need that free and independent media to hold us accountable. So the likes of what am I saying is being challenged, because that's what we're absorbing, both online and offline. And that's how you protect free speech, I believe, along with education, not just for young people, but for all, because there's a lot of people in the plus 55 age demographic that are absorbing Facebook posts like no tomorrow, and they're targeted sponsorship ads from outside of the EU or from independents who are populists and are not being held accountable. And we have a lot of work to do around with legislation that needs to essentially curb the SHITA.
Okay, thanks, Maria. There's a question there in the front. And I'm just conscious the wine is either getting cold or hot or whatever. So we're in an hour, and I know that we're going to be wrapping it up shortly.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Sonia Nomba. I am a first year BA government student at the University of Galway. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, first of all. And I just want to say that despite the EU's commitment to gender equality, women remain underrepresented in the leadership roles. So what do you see as the biggest barriers preventing young women from stepping into leadership, particularly in politics? Thank you very much.
Yeah, and you know, the Northern Western region, you know, in terms of our elected representatives, we're way behind in terms of women in politics, you know, and I don't know. But I've colleagues here who are meeting tough women in politics. Ciaran, do you want to kick off that one?
It's a deep-rooted problem, and you know, Ireland has huge issues. The world has huge issues. I was in Poland last week and went to a meeting of the Ministry of Energy and looked around the table. 14 men. Went into the next town to meet the trade union. 12 men. Went into the next area, the mine management. 14 men. Where are the women in this? And when we even looked at the EU legislation, it's part of the problem, which I was particularly interested in, the Just Transition Fund, which is looking at areas affected by decarbonisation. So out there, the mines are closing. And I looked at the legislation and I said, where is the legislation supporting the women in the community? It's all about the reskilling and upgrading of the men in the legislation. There's no mention of women in the legislation. So it's deep-rooted. We are part of the problem ourselves in Europe. I won't deny it. But, you know, it particularly annoys me in that case because obviously the minors are not going to work. It is the women who will be the bread earner in the house going forward. And they are the people who are going to be, particularly a man over the age of 55 or 60 years of age, who's been a minor all his life. So that focus we have to go back, and including in Europe. There is good work going on. I know there is good work. I don't agree in some of the stuff about quotas that's happening. I think that's not helping in some cases. I think, you know, we need to work hard to make it possible for women and men to be in politics.
Well, my views on quotas changed significantly. You know, I think that, well, that's my opinion isn't relevant here. I'm the
yeah, no, it is important. It is important.
But my views on quotas would have changed a lot. I would have been completely against quotas once upon a time. I would have said it's all on merit, blah, blah, blah. And it will take forever. And I suppose I was the beneficiary of us having to have male and female representation on our governing body. I'm going back 25 years ago. And it gave me an experience that I would never have had. We had to have women, a female seat. We had to have a male seat. And I got an experience that helped me, helped me appreciate that I actually can do this and I can contribute and I can make an impact. So my views on quotas are very different to what they might have been, and I'm in favour of
I would have
quotas.
agreed with you, but one example, Roscommon County Council had two fantastic women on the last council before this year, Orla Layden and Kathleen Shanner, one Fianna Fáil, one independent. Absolutely outstanding people. They both walked away because varying issues in regard to career and regard to education and regard to time and living.
There are barriers.
There are huge barriers
Yeah,
there.
childcare, etc.
Just, last year, in advance of the sports capital allocations, bringing the Minister with responsibility in relation to its distribution around the different applying clubs and organisations, I was delighted to see that the majority of applications were made by women's clubs or women's sections within the GAA, soccer, camogie, which was a reflection of the advancements that's taken place in sport, which was a reflection of the commitment that was made by that department to ensure that women were on the had places on the boards and so forth. And I think the more of that will lead by example. I think the abuses levelled at politicians undoubtedly impact more on women than they do on men, and the type of abuse and level of abuse is far greater against women than it is against me. And that's not to say that I'm tough-skinned or I'm this, that, and the other. We're all impacted by it. I've been impacted by it. It has impacted me and has disappointed me and has had me thinking twice about remaining or continuing in politics. So I can only imagine the impact it has on the opposite sex, because as Maria alluded to in relation to the abuse of AI and the manner in which it's targeted at 96, 97% against women, that says it all. And quota system was well intended, but it hasn't worked. But I think there's more deeper problems than the quota system being the problem.
I'm going to ask Maria now to give the last word on this, and I'm just conscious we've gone way over time, and we'll be having the wind down.
I feel like this particular topic could issue, and it's a pandemic, and not just here in Ireland, but across Europe, across the world. We've actually dropped down a percentage in the European Parliament on representation, and I won't even entertain the numbers, sadly, that are not sitting around the table or elected, and that's down to us voters. In many cases, I believe in gender quotas, wish they didn't exist. However, I have colleagues who, myself included, who wouldn't even got close to the table, never mind in the room, if we didn't have gender quotas. I also think we have an issue around women being supportive of other women. I have a great mentor, or I call the board of directors of Mana, that make sure I'm in certain rooms, but we need to make sure that gets right across other women, particularly younger women that are trying to excel in their career, or academics, or if not. I will say though, our money has to go where our attention is. And to Barry's point, I'll pick up on entrepreneurs. So right now in the EU, roughly, it's just about 40% of entrepreneurs are women. Yet access to finance is less than 0.3%. So if you equate those numbers, women, we ain't even getting out of our kitchen tables to create actually sustainable change, or the social enterprises, or the big, bold moves that we need to do now, because we're not putting our money where our intention needs to go. And that is bias, that's unconscious bias, that's calling out the stuff when it needs to get called out, and then pulling people aside when it also needs to be pulled to say, listen, buddy, that's not appropriate, or can I just share a lived experience of how that's impacting people in the room when you say that? I will also point out to Barry's point, and he's right. I mean, sadly, the sexualized and horrendous content that women get in comparison to the other gender, and we could have a few genders. I want to be loose with my language on that one too, to not offend anybody. But the content that I would get in comparison to others is criminal in many cases. And I'm actually scraping the surface of a public profile in comparison to the likes of Helen McEntee, Hildegard Naughton closer here, Norma Foley, who, never mind Roberta Metsola or Ursula von der Leyen. So I'm super conscious of that. And we also need people in rooms of privilege to say, who's not in the room, and it's predominantly people of colour, people with disabilities and different abilities, and women who get shoved out there. So our legislation, funding, conversation, education is a couple of the top notes that I would sit on those points.
Thank you, Maria. And can I just say that we've got some amazing female founders here in Galway. So Mary Rogers is doing a great job in the Portershed, and we've a lot of really strong female founders in the medtech space, in particular, a lot of them coming from the BioInnovate program in University of Galway. Brendan, I'm going to give you...
Etna Curley.
Actually, yes, the first female veterinary surgeon in Ireland. Brendan, I'm going to give you the very last word, and then we're going to call it a day.
Under pressure.
What do you make of it all?
You put me under pressure now.
What do you make of it all? We've covered a lot of topics here. We've covered farming, transport.
My final point would be to say two things, if I can be cheeky, and I know you're the president of ATU, but if I can I invite the MEPs back to the University of Galway, and they can go and visit ATU as well, which is a fantastic campus like our own. And the reason why, we need more politics, not less. Of the right sort, which isn't determined because there's left and right and centre, and I'm not saying that, but not the toxic stuff, not the stuff which is weaponised, and not the stuff which is shouty. And that's a university. Universities, and you're a university, I'm from a university, it's a space of creativity, it's a space of debate. Sometimes we have intense arguments, I might disagree with you, but I'll always respect you, and I'll always listen to you, and I can actually learn from you. So we need our MEPs, we need to see you more. I know you have a brutal travel schedule, and I know it's hard to get here, but I'd like to invite you back to Galway this time next year if you could make it, and bring some more. Yeah. And I want you to meet these fantastic people, which are our students and our farmers, and the other people who've turned up here. Because we actually, Bridget Laffin, who's a great hero of mine, and I think academics have played a very interesting role in European Union studies in Ireland, broadly construed, legal, economics, geography, everything. Women have actually carved out a path in that as opposed to men. She always says this: we need more politics, we need more debate about farming, we need more debate about mental health and health services. Why can't it be a European issue? Why should it have to be just national? We need more debate about neutrality, security, defence, and what way can we have a positive neutrality, or what way can we have a positive security and defence? What does that look like? So come back in 12 months' time, and hopefully a lot of them will have graduated, but I'll still be here.
Can I just add one final? There's endless opportunities in the European institutions, and when we have a group of young people and all people in the room, I just want to stress that we, as an Irish Inc., do not have enough people in those institutions. We did over Brexit, and then subsequently moved on, or they've retired, and that skill set is lacking. So be it interpretation, translation, legal, advisors, you name it, politicians, we're all up for renewal in 2029. So it's really, really important that you also think about EU careers too.
And at the other end, it's important at the top end. When we go to Brussels in terms of decisions, the big focus on the Commissioner is on the cabinets. There is an absence of Irish people in the cabinets right across the board. Last year, when I joined, we had a man called Anthony Ryan, was it, from Limerick, was in the cabinet with von der Leyen. I met him, Anthony Whelan. Anthony Whelan. I met Anthony the other day in the cabinet. He's leaving, he's coming back to Dublin, and he confirmed for me, we have no Irish people in the cabinets of any significant of the position of the Commissioner, and that's where decisions are made. Okay. So the other end is where we need you as well.
All right, that's the chat for the wine. Can I ask you to put your hands together, and thank you so much for your time today.